What if the most terrifying version of Freddy Krueger was never bound to dreams at all? What if the nightmare didn't begin when you closed your eyes but when you opened them? Imagine waking up with a thought that doesn't feel like yours. A whisper that blends perfectly with your inner voice. So natural that you don't question it at first. That's where true terror lies, not in claws or blood, but in uncertainty. Tonight, we're not talking about a monster stalking teenagers in their sleep. We're unmasking a far more chilling possibility. Freddy's soul as a parasitic consciousness. A presence that infects the waking mind and quietly dismantles reality from the inside out. Before we go deeper, ask yourself something unsettling. How do you know your thoughts are truly yours? How many ideas, fears, or impulses pass through your mind each day without question? Psychological horror doesn't announce itself with screams. It arrives softly, patiently, waiting for doubt to take root. This is where our story begins, not in a dreamscape, but in the fragile space between perception and belief. Welcome back to True Terror Files Official, the channel where fear isn't just seen, it's understood. If you're fascinated by psychological horror, unseen hauntings, and stories that linger long after the screen goes dark, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We don't chest jump scares here. We expose the kind of terror that crawls into your thoughts and refuses to leave. Now imagine this. Freddy's soul survives destruction, not as a body, not even as a dream demon, but as a consciousness that learns something terrifying about humans. You don't need sleep to break someone. You only need access to their mind. At first, the changes are subtle. A dark sense of humor creeping into your thoughts. A cruel idea that feels oddly clever. You laugh it off. Everyone has intrusive thoughts, right? But what if those thoughts begin responding to you? What if fear itself starts to feel amused? This is not possession. This is something worse. This is influence. And once influence takes hold, escape becomes nearly impossible. A physical monster can be fought. A mental one hides behind logic. If Freddy's soul existed as a psychological entity, it wouldn't attack, it would suggest. It would bend perception just enough to make you question yourself. You begin noticing things that don't quite belong. The faint smell of smoke in a clean room. A soft scraping sound when no one is there. Not loud enough to panic, just loud enough to notice. Your brain fills in the blanks, always trying to rationalize. That's the trap. This version of Freddy doesn't slash flesh, it rewrites. Meaning, a joke you once found harmless now feels cruel. A mirror reflection lingers half a second too long. You start misremembering conversations. Did they really say that? Or did you imagine it? The more you doubt yourself, the more space the entity gains. Psychological haunting thrives on ambiguity. There's no dramatic reveal in the erosion. Freddy's presence manifests through emotional distortion. Irritation becomes rage. Fear becomes obsession. Confidence decays into self-loathing. And the worst part, it feels earned. It feels like personal failure, not external attack. Friends notice changes before you do. They say you're distant, paranoid, tired. You dismiss them, because admitting something is wrong would mean confronting the impossible. The entity feeds on attention, but not awareness. If you acknowledge it directly, it retreats just enough to make you doubt it ever existed. That's how it survives. That is, say, how it wins. And slowly, you begin to realize something horrifying. The fear isn't coming from outside anymore. It's being generated internally, recycled, amplified. Freddy doesn't need dreams when he can turn consciousness itself into a nightmare factory. Dream logic doesn't vanish. When you wake up, it just changes form. In this scenario, Freddy's soul bends probability, not physics. Coincidences stack too neatly. You think of someone, and they call immediately. You misplace an object, only to find it somewhere impossible. Reality begins behaving like a dream that refuses to end. Memories become unstable. Childhood moments feel altered. Events you were certain happened now feel real. Freddy exploits insecurity like a surgeon, isolating his victim by making them distrust their own history. If you can't trust your past, how can you trust your present? This is where psychological terror peaks. The mind, desperate for certainty, begins clinging to patterns and false ones. You assign meaning where none exists, or worse, miss meaning where it does. The entity doesn't need control, it needs confusion, and confusion spreads fast. Freddy's voice isn't audible, it's tonal. It shifts how thoughts feel, a sudden sense of mockery attached to your fears, a cruel amusement tied to your pain. You don't hear laugh to sense it, and that makes it personal. This isn't a haunting of space. This is a haunting of identity. The longer it continues, the more the victim adapts, mistaking survival for stability. But the adaptation is surrender in disguise. And by the time you realize the rules of reality have changed, you no longer remember what normal felt like. Psychological breakdown doesn't happen in one moment. It unfolds in stages. First comes denial, then rationalization, then isolation. Sleep becomes fragmented, not because of nightmares but because silence feels unsafe. The mind stays alert, listening for thoughts that don't belong. Relationships fracture. Communication feels exhausting. The entity encourages withdrawal, feeding the illusion that others wouldn't understand anyway. And maybe they wouldn't. How do you explain a threat that leaves no marks? Freddy's ultimate goal isn't to fix dependency. A mind pushed far enough begins relying on the very presence harming it. Fear becomes familiar. Chaos becomes predictable. And predictability feels like control. That's the final trap. At these Stakis, a victor isn't haunted, they're inhabited. Not possessed, but a living extension of the nightmare. Functioning, breathing, existing in a world that no longer feels real. And the scariest part, no one else can see it, because from the outside, you look fine. If such a haunting existed, recognition would be the first weapon. Patterns matter, recurring, intrusive thoughts, emotional reactions that feel foreign, a consistent sense of being watched not externally, but internally. Fear thrives in secrecy. Understanding disrupts it. Freddy's power has always depended on belief. Not belief in him, but belief in fear itself. Strengthening the mind doesn't mean aggression. It means grounding. Reality checks, external anchors, community, the refusal to isolate. A parasitic consciousness cannot survive scrutiny. It needs ambiguity. It needs silence. It needs you to think you're alone. And you're not. So ask yourself one final question. If fear had a voice in your mind, would you recognize it, or would you mistake it for your own? If this story unsettled you, that's the point. Because the most terrifying horror doesn't end when the video does. This is True Terror Files official, and the true nightmare is always closer than you think.